Thank you for joining us. We have hundreds of listeners from around the world on the line, so we're excited to start the conversation. Amongst our listeners, we have some new applicants for both programs, those that have just been accepted to one of our programs, and others that are interested in simply learning more about WorldTeach, the Peace Corps, and what it's like to teach and volunteer abroad. We also have our panelists, all alumni of our programs, joining us from the Peace Corps and WorldTeach. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Nolan Sutker, the Director of Communications at WorldTeach. We also have Lori Dunn on the line, the Boston Regional Recruiter for the Peace Corps. You'll meet us and our other panelists on the line in a couple of minutes. Again, we have more than 200 people who have registered for this webinar from around the world, so let's get started. So, to start, let's go over our agenda. We'll spend a few moments meeting our panelists and learning a bit about their diverse backgrounds and current endeavors. Then we'll provide an overview of our organizations before jumping into the main part of the webinar. We have a series of questions we'll ask the panelists, as well as other previously submitted by attendees and some who are currently on the line. Finally, we'll have some closing statements by our panelists, including recommendations for why people should volunteer abroad and where they see the field heading. So, quickly to introduce myself, again, my name is Nolan Sutker, the Director of Communications here at WorldTeach, and I was a teacher for more than 3 years in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, at both a private school and in Rocinha, the largest slum in Latin America. I hold a Master's in International Education Management and Policy from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. Previous work before this was both at EF Education First, a for-profit organization in international education, as well as in the business world before I became a teacher. Next, we have Lori Dunn. Lori, as I mentioned, is the co-facilitator for this webinar. Lori, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to our listeners?
Would. Thank you, Nolan. Hi, everybody. My name is Lori Dunn. I'm the regional recruiter for the Boston area. Thank you all for attending. I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Azerbaijan in 2009 to 2011. After completing that, I did work abroad a bit more in India. And then I returned back to the Boston area to get a master's in international development and another master's in coexistence and conflicts. After working a bit in the nonprofit community in the Boston area, I then became the regional recruiter for Peace Corps.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Lori. Next come the stars of our show. Tonight's panelists. Joining us live is Christina Donnelly, an RPCV from 2012 who served in Togo. Christina, again, we're so grateful for your participation tonight, along with all our panelists. Thank you so much for being here. Can you introduce yourself and tell us how you first found the Peace Corps and why you decided to join?
Sure. So I studied abroad during college in Senegal, and as part of the program we did a rural visit, a week-long rural visit, and I spent about 5 days living with a Peace Corps volunteer in her village of 400 people, and my reaction was pretty much, oh my goodness, I could never do that, even after the experience, and then it just kind of stayed with me. So I served as an AmeriCorps Vista straight out of college, and with that having kind of an end date, I figured, that was as good a time as any to apply and see what happened, and then I ended up in Togo.
Wow, incredible. Thank you, Christina. Moving along, we have our next panelist, and Heather Tang is with us. Heather, thank you again so much for joining us tonight. Heather, as well, just like we did with Christina, would you like to first introduce yourself and tell us how you first came across WorldTeach and why, in fact, you decided to join the team of WorldTeach?
Yeah, so I also studied abroad in college in New Zealand, when I was at Boston University, and that kind of got me bitten by the travel bug that all of us tended to get along the way. And so after I graduated, I went and I taught abroad in Japan for a couple of years and really got hooked onto teaching and education there. And then when I came back, I was like, what am I going to do now? I could go to school, but I just still wanted to go back abroad again and teach a bit longer to see if that was what I really wanted to continue doing. So I looked around for programs and kind of settled on South America as the place I wanted to go, and found the Chile program with WorldTeach. And so I ended up teaching as a volunteer in Chile for a year, and then was hired on as field director for WorldTeach Chile the year after. I ran the program, and then decided to come back to the United States, and then I worked for City Year Boston for 2 years on staff, and then came back to WorldTeach because couldn't get away from the international education draw, which is where I am now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Heather. Our next panelist is Abigail Kelbel. Abigail, please as well. She was an RPCV from 2008 who served in Moldova and a Peace Corps response alumni from Jamaica. Thanks so much for being here. And again, please introduce yourself as well as how you first came across the Peace Corps and why you decided to do the program.
Hi everyone, I'm Abigail. So yeah, I did the Peace Corps in Moldova, had an amazing time. I found the Peace Corps really just on the internet. I mean, I was served in 06 to 08. I remember being in college thinking I wanted, I think just not knowing what I wanted, but I knew that I liked different cultures, I knew I liked health, and I ended up getting my master's in public health, but it was during my graduate degree where I did some research in Poland that I really got that kind of international travel bug. And I joined the Peace Corps for adventure and to learn more about the world and to really experience, more to life, as well as to, do something good in the process. But I think the adventure was the biggest lure for me. After the Peace Corps, I've worked with City Year. I'm currently managing director at the Millennium Campus Network, where I'm actually continue to teach in many different ways, specifically with undergraduate university students as they pursue careers in social impact.
Okay, thank you, Abigail. As you can see, very, very diverse yet impressive backgrounds of all of our panelists. And as we continue along, our final panelist is we have Elizabeth Blanco. Liz is a current program director and previous volunteer in Micronesia and a field director in American Samoa. Liz, would you like to introduce yourself and again tell us how you first came across WorldTeach and why you decided to do the program?
Absolutely. Thank you, Nolan. And everyone, my name is Elizabeth Blanco. I, as Nolan said, is a program director at WorldTeach currently. I oversee the programs in Colombia, Ecuador, and 3 programs within the Federated States of Micronesia. What initially started me on the road to WorldTeach started when I went ahead and studied somewhat abroad. I actually studied during college at Guam, at the University of Guam. I was able to do that for a semester. I was brought there because my dad's originally from Guam and I wanted to get to know my heritage a little bit. While I was there, I also was a teaching assistant for a professor within the business college, and my time there really cemented my love of that region and my love of working within education. So after I got back and then after I graduated and spending time in a profession of, I was a purchasing manager, I realized I really needed to get back in that region and I really needed to get back with working within education. I put out feelers within my networks about my desires, and at one point somebody brought me to the WorldTeach Micronesia website. After looking into it, it looked like a perfect fit. I went ahead and applied and had an amazing time over in Chuuk, Micronesia. As Nolan mentioned, after my time in Micronesia, I served as field director in American Samoa, getting to know the region of Polynesia, which was really nice, and now I'm here over in Boston working for WorldTeach as a program director.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. Again, those are our 4 panelists for the evening, as well as your facilitators, myself and Lori. And now we're going to get to the next part of the webinar, where we're going to kind of give our missions and some backgrounds of our organizations before we get into some personal questions. So, as you'll see on the screen here, a quick introduction to WorldTeach. WorldTeach originally started in 1986 as a student-led organization through Harvard University. Now we are an independent, nonprofit, non-government organization still based in Harvard Square with over 7,000 alumni, and we currently serve in 16 different countries around the world, with approximately 400 volunteers per year who go to these respective countries. Our mission explains further that our work is changing both the community where we serve and the volunteer. WorldTeach partners with governments and other organizations in low and middle income countries to provide volunteer teachers to meet local needs and promote responsible global citizenship. Next, Lori, if you'd like to as well give some additional information and the mission of the Peace Corps, we'd love for you to share.
Yes, Peace Corps began in 1961 when President John F. Kennedy signed it in, so we are a federal government agency. And what we do, as you can see by our mission, is that we meet the needs of trained men and women, and then we do a lot of culture sharing. So it is a lot about learning each culture, teaching what we know of U.S. culture, and gleaning what we can of the other culture, and bringing that back home, which is a big point of our third goal there. We do send U.S. citizens abroad for the 27 months. So we are there because the length of that program is how we value our effectiveness.
Great. Thank you, Lori. We'll get to some more details about our organization later in the presentation, but right now we're going to go to our first set of questions for the panelists. Here we go. So, how we're going to work this, we'll have our Q&A session. Since we have 4 panelists and many questions to be answered, we'll start by asking Christina and Heather, and then switch the panelists to respond for each slide. At the end of the Q&A, we'll share some key questions asked by participants, which will be open to all 4 of the panelists. Okay, here's the first one for Christina and Heather. Christina, you can go first, and then Heather, you can follow. What was your community like where you were? Was it rural and urban? And of course, you can describe it in more detail.
Sure. So my community, well, just to give a little background. So Togo, for anyone who doesn't know or might have Googled it in the meantime, is a tiny country in West Africa between Ghana and Benin. And so all things considered, for Togo, my community, the village that I was in, was considered a large town. By most standards, that is pretty rural, but for Togo, it had some basic amenities. There was a main road that went through it, so I had easy access to get in and out of the village. I wasn't too far away from the capital city, and I did have electricity. For Peace Corps volunteers, as Lori and Abigail know, that's kind of like the gauge of how intense your situation was, whether you had running water and or electricity. So I didn't have running water. I had a well that I pulled water from, but I did have electricity in my village. So like I said, it was a small town. It was large enough that I had some anonymity and privacy, but it was small enough that everyone kind of knew who I was still.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christina. So a relatively small town. And Heather, would you like to elaborate a bit on your experience?
Yeah, so I was, like I said, I was in Chile, which is the very long and narrow country on the western coast of South America, in the southern cone. And my community was, I guess you would say, would be suburban, neither urban or rural. It was considered a city, but it just seemed like just a large sprawl of just 1 or 2 level buildings, nothing really tall like you would imagine a city would have. And so I lived with a host family there, and the houses are pretty close together. Everyone has a wall around each of their houses and a gate that locks because petty theft is pretty common there, so everyone had to keep things locked inside. But it was kind of large enough to be anonymous, but because I don't look like I am Latina, I'm sure that people who saw me on a more regular basis probably recognized who I was. I don't think they knew who I was, but I probably stuck out, and they probably knew the area where I taught and where I lived. But it had all the amenities like electricity and running water, and they were very proud that they had a small shopping mall in the center and had a few stores in it, and then it was pretty close to the metro, which actually went out to the bigger cities of Valparaiso and Viña del Mar. So things were pretty accessible where I was.
Thank you, Heather and Christina. Next here, Lori, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yes. Next, this question is for Liz and Abigail. How large were your classes, and what subjects did you teach and what grade level? Abigail, let's start with you.
So I taught 7th grade up to 12th grade, so all of the grades in between. My classes were anywhere between 9 to 25 per class. And I taught health education and life skills. So that meant everything from cancer to HIV to personal finance to self-esteem.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Liz?
So I taught over at Chuuk High School, and while I was there, I taught 9th and 10th grade. So I had 5 different classes. 4 of those were 9th grade. My students ranged in age from 9th grade from about 12 to about 17, and then I had one 10th grade class. In that class, I had students from about 15 to 21. In terms of class size, I had anywhere between 20, I believe, was my smallest class, although they didn't all always show up. And then I'd say about 35 was my largest class.
Okay.
And I taught English.
Oh, thank you. And our next question is for all 4 panelists. And it is, did you work with a counterpart or a co-teacher? Liz, could you answer that, please?
Yes, so I actually did independent teaching in my classrooms.
Okay, great. And Abigail?
Yes, so I worked with the school's biology teacher, and together we taught health education. What that meant was that we did all of our lesson planning together, debriefing all of the lessons together, teaching together. Everything was really side by side the whole time.
Okay, thank you. And Heather?
Yeah, I had an assigned co-teacher at my school as well, but I did a mix of independent teaching and co-teaching with her. What we did was that since the class sizes are pretty large at my school, we split the classes in half to about 20 kids per class, and being a 90-minute class, we would split 45 minutes each, and I would focus on speaking and listening lessons, and she would do reading and writing, and then we would switch at the halfway point and do the same lesson for the other half of the class. That was when there was space available for me to take the class to another part to do that, and then when there wasn't space, we would co-teach in the same classroom.
Wow, nice. Okay, and finally, Christina.
I'm similar to Heather, where it was a little bit of a mix. When I was first in Village, I did a lot of shadowing and then kind of transitioned into, I guess, what you would call co-teaching, or at least me kind of taking over with the teacher in the room. The class sizes in Togo tend to be really large, so anywhere from like 50 to 70 students. So it was often very helpful to have a Togolese teacher in the room with me. And so, but towards the end of my service, I was in my second year, I did take on a couple of classes by myself and was just alone with the students.
Okay, thank you. Right, and our next question, Nolan, would you like to take it from here?
Okay, thank you, Lori. Thank you for your responses, everyone. This next one is specifically for Heather and Christina. Now, as I switch the slide here, this is a very broad question, so you can answer this in a variety of ways, but thinking about the biggest cultural challenge, think about maybe a couple of moments where you found differences in the realization that you were in another culture. Potentially, if you'd like, share a couple of concrete examples of some circumstance that may have occurred, just to have a picture of what some cultural challenges you had during your experience. Heather, you can start us off.
Sure. So I have a couple that I can think of that stuck out. One being related to teaching, and the other one just related to living in Chile. The biggest cultural challenge when I was teaching was that the amount of class time and class hours was not always taken too seriously by the students and also by administration, and not because people would not the administration would just cancel classes and skip school, but there was just a lot going on all the time, and so if we had classes planned out and just certain classes on track to match the other classes that we've been teaching, there would always be class cancellations for events at the school or holidays. I was there during the World Cup in South Africa, and so anytime that Chile was playing a match, all classes would be canceled and all the kids would go and watch the game in the cafeteria. So it was just a little bit frustrating as a teacher to be able to keep the kids on track and follow the curriculum that we were doing. And then also when it rained, the kids didn't come to school, mostly because there's no heating or anything, and the schools tend to be outdoor-based besides the classrooms themselves, and so if the kids got wet, it would be pretty cold during the day for them, and they could never dry off, and so most kids just tended to not show up to school when it rained. The biggest cultural challenge living in my host family or just living in my town, I guess I didn't speak any Spanish before I went, so trying to figure out how to communicate was pretty difficult at first. Had a lot of hand gestures and pointing and just learning random words, and then once that hurdle was kind of crossed, not in any kind of fluency way for most of that beginning part of the year, but the other thing that happened was that there are a lot of stray dogs in Chile, and thus a lot of fleas, and so I actually got bitten by fleas for 4 or 5 months straight every day, and I tried everything to get rid of them and just could not shake them. And it's like, yeah, they almost turned to like the same mentality I have about mosquitoes, no big deal, but it's just a little bit demoralizing when you're trying to fight them off every day and they just keep coming back. So that was a little bit of a mental challenge, but not too awful once I just kind of accepted that it was going to happen.
And Christina, would you like to elaborate as well?
Sure. So I will. I guess there were a lot of cultural challenges. Being a single female living in a village in West Africa, so I'll keep them somewhat limited to my teaching experience. One big thing that was a big adjustment, and I know it is for all Peace Corps volunteers in Togo, is that corporal punishment is still very much alive and well, and so in the classroom that was a really normal form of discipline, was to hit children either with a ruler or with a stick or whatever it may be. And as horrible as it sounds, it was really hard to get kids to behave without that, which of course I never hit any of my students, but it left me with very few options of how to discipline them, because that was the discipline that they were used to, and that was how they responded. So, like I said, I never did it, but it did exist in the school, and it was difficult to be around it. So that was one thing. Another thing, just within the classroom, is that a lot of Togo's education system is based on rote memorization and repetition, repeating it back. And so when I would get up in front of a classroom and ask kind of like open-ended, very American type questions, I would often get blank, 30 to 50 blank stares back at me, because they really just had no idea how to answer me, because I wasn't asking them a question that they had memorized the answer to in the past. So that was something that we worked on, and they kind of got used to my style, and I adjusted myself to ask them questions that were still somewhat open-ended, but a little bit more directed. One kind of funny anecdote that will just illustrate a good cultural challenge is that what's it called? Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on the word. Voodoo. Voodoo is and kind of animism are alive and well in Togo as well. And I was teaching a course on HIV/AIDS, and we were talking about modes of transmission. And I was very clear with them that there were very specific modes of transmission, and they had all kinds of other kinds, like a woman who is selling food could cut herself and put her blood in it and infect the whole village. So there was a lot of explaining about what were and weren't modes of transmission, but one day a student told me that someone could put a spell on another person, and that was a voodoo spell, and that's how they would get HIV. And so I called in other teachers from the school. I called them in for backup, and they didn't refute it as strongly as I expected them to or would have liked them to. They were kind of, their response was kind of like, oh, well, it could happen. So that was definitely a challenge.
Wow. So we have some fleas, stray dogs, rain keeping the kids away, and then a Salem-like witch trial fever going on in Togo. So very, very diverse experiences that both of you had, and thank you for sharing them. I'll move it back over to Lori. Lori, if you'd like to go from here and go on to this next slide, which I'm going to get to. And thank you.
Man, these stories are great. I'm having a hard time not cracking up. So next up, it's your turn, Liz and Abigail. What is one way that you changed the environment of the class, and one way that it has changed you? Liz, let's get you started.
This is a great question. So in terms of the way that I changed the environment in the class, the first day I was there and I had been told this is going to happen, my students were very, very shy. I tried to get each of them to talk, introduce themselves, and it took almost the entire period, every class, for me to be able to go around to each student and put my ear close to them so I could hear them whisper their name. But that shyness kind of melted away very quickly once they got to know me, and then I saw the amount of energy that they had on a daily basis. So one thing that I really tried to do was to channel that energy into learning games, because they really enjoyed learning that way. Did things like bingo. We did some, a lot of games where there's a lot of movement, because that helped with them retaining some of the information. So I was able to channel all that energy that they had into their schoolwork and into enjoying being in the classroom. In terms of a way that it changed me, I would say that it just helped me kind of thin out my cultural lens. I've always tried to make sure that I wasn't ethnocentric in my views, or at least tried to take that in anytime I'm looking at a situation, but being so close with my students who are so amazing and learning about the circumstances that they're in, what they do on a daily basis, what their family life is like, whether they have running water, whether they have electricity, all of these different things. For example, a lot of times if I were to give homework, I wouldn't receive it back. And of course, it's not that my students didn't want to do the homework or that they were lazy. There were a lot of really passionate students in the classroom, but I had a lot of students that had other things they had to do. They had church that was very important. They had family that was very important. Some of them had to walk an hour or two to school every day and walk home. When they woke up in the morning, they may have to take care of some of their siblings. Some may have to go fishing with their fathers as a responsibility for the household. So there are all these different circumstances that, although I know that they have them, really being in there and being able to see them different lifestyles really helped me, have a bigger view of the world and appreciate every different type of lifestyle.
Wonderful, thank you. And Abigail?
Yeah, so for me, to answer this question, it leads directly to actually the previous question, which was cultural challenges. And I think I addressed these challenges in very specific and consistent ways throughout my service. So what I found when I was finally able to name it, when I was in my village, what I found was that there was a very static view of students as learners. Sometimes I think in America we think of learning as something that can change. You can be not very smart at something and then learn more and then you're smarter at it. But what I found was that students would just be called smart or they would be called stupid, and they would be treated as such. And it didn't really matter what else they did. It wasn't really, I don't think there was an appreciation for the potential of learning or learning as seen as any sort of dynamic process. It was just a static view. The other challenge I found was the physical punishment and kind of an emotional lack of control on the part of the teachers, so getting like really frustrated, verbally yelling at them, stomping their feet, pulling their ears, hitting their heads or their faces. And for me, how I did actually change some aspects of that environment, I took a very sort of cheerful insistence but very consistent approach. So for example, every time my partner teacher stomped her feet, I would give her this perfect shock on my face, and then I would move on to the cheerful to the next peaceful lesson. And she would do it again, I'd give her the same super shock look, and then move on to the cheerful. With the static view of students, I would find ways to showcase the genius of students who were kind of previously poorly treated or overlooked, or I would make a point of verbally, saying, adding positive reinforcement to students no matter what their perceived intellectual level was in the classroom, and just really being consistent and cheerful about those things. What I found happened over time, about a year and a half in, I noticed that my partner teacher was stomping her feet less. There was a little bit more gentleness towards the students. I don't know that I had changed the static view of students necessarily, but I definitely saw changes in my students, kind of being more open. And at about the 2-year mark, the principal out of nowhere came up to me and she said, since you've been here, the students smile more. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I think, we can change our environment slowly but surely if we're just really consistent. And the way it changed me was really finding that, I had that power internally and I could influence my environment. In other words, I could either influence my environment or I could accept where I couldn't influence that. And so really finding that distinction and sort of growing in that wisdom was one way that it changed me.
Thank you, Abigail. Nolan, can I pass it back to you?
Definitely. Thanks, Lori, and thanks, Abigail and Liz, for sharing that part. They really are. They're incredible stories that we all can relate to, and I hope these listeners are really getting a glimpse to understand how unique the classrooms are once we are in our positions. Moving to the next part, just quickly with WorldTeach, we typically do a month of training for our year-long programs, and the Peace Corps has 3 months of training before you enter into basically 2 years in the field. First, we'll start with Christina and then Heather. How was your training practically used in the classroom? How was the training that you received from WorldTeach and Peace Corps helpful in the classroom? So, Christina, you could start with you.
Sure. A lot of the training that we received was cultural training, which in an environment that was so different from an American classroom or just, America in general, it was really important. So things like the corporal punishment and how to respond to that and just kind of mentally and emotionally preparing for what the classroom would be like was really helpful. We also did a lot of practical things throughout training, like going to a classroom and attempting, to carry out a lesson plan in a Togolese classroom, and kind of realizing how difficult it was, coming back and debriefing about what some of the challenges are, and then kind of strategizing ways to improve our techniques in the future. So there was a lot of support from other Peace Corps volunteers as well as Peace Corps staff. And I think, the training, the 3 months of training was really important, but we also would have other trainings throughout our service, which, like I said about the classroom, the practice in the classroom, it was really important to come back with kind of lessons learned and then refresh to go back and face new challenges.
Okay, and Heather as well. Elaborate a bit on the training and how it was relevant for you in the classroom and the practical sense too.
Yeah, so my field director, when I was a volunteer in Chile, she was a phenomenal teacher. She had a background in education, and so she ran the training as if she was running a classroom. And she had been a previous WorldTeach volunteer the year before in Chile as well, so she was very well versed in the cultural aspect of teaching in Chile as well. So herself was a huge resource in terms of adjusting to teaching in Chile, in a completely different environment from where I'd come from, which was teaching in Japan for a couple of years, where I taught mostly adults and in small groups, and Japanese tend to be very disciplined in classrooms, so it was a pretty big switch to go to a public school in Chile and teach there. But the training that Allison, my field director, provided with the WorldTeach materials and WorldTeach support was really comprehensive in that it prepared us to put a classroom in the context of a Chilean classroom, as well as the overall classroom management and lesson planning and whatnot that is just fundamental in being able to run your own classroom. So that was pretty vital in a group that had people who were previously teachers and people who had never taught before at all. And then over the course of the year, just like in the Peace Corps, we had additional training where we came back and just kind of shared best practices and shared challenges that we were having and kind of bounced ideas off of each other to try to make the second half of the year and the rest of the year even better than what we had started with.
Great. Thank you, Christina and Heather, for that elaboration. We'll do now is we'll keep going, and I'll turn it back over to Lori. Lori, if you'd like to take on this next part.
Absolutely. All right, Liz and Abigail, we have one last question before we go to a couple of questions from our listeners. So what is one piece of advice you'd give to a potential volunteer? Abigail, why don't you start us out?
Oh my goodness, Lori, I have so many pieces of advice. And I'm gonna list several of them out, but I promise to be brief. I think number one, go for your own reasons, and whatever those reasons are, honor those reasons. Try not to judge whatever those reasons are. I think number two, stay wherever you're at. Try to stay there, because life back home will be waiting for you, whether you quit early or whether you stick it out. So try to stick it out if you can. I think embracing the uncomfortability of it is really important. Trusting yourself that you've got this. And final piece of advice: just manage your own expectations. Sometimes, especially if you're earlier in your career, there's an expectation that that any organization will lay out the path to success for you, give you all these clear goals, support you ideally, and life is not like that. You have to move forward, onward through the fog, and trust that that you can figure it out, and that you have the inner resilience to succeed, and at least to enjoy the experience. That's my advice.
Thank you, Abigail. Liz, how about you?
I'm actually going to piggyback a little bit off of Abigail with the expectations. I think it's a really good piece of advice to manage your expectations. Even you're always going to have expectations in anything that you go into, but try to let go of them as much as possible. I know that you always want to really get to know where you're going to go and do your research, and that is a fantastic thing to do, so you're prepared for different things that might come your way. But in terms of expectations, you can't really know what it's like until you're there on the ground. So you can read about things, you can hear stories about things, but until you really experience it, you don't have the full grasp of what it's like to be, embodied by it. Being in the classroom, being overseas, being in a new culture, there are all these new things that are going to be coming your way, and it's just really good to be able to roll with the punches and expect anything, because if you think anything's going to come, it's easier to ride the wave. And if you're going to ride the wave of things that are coming, you can really have great experiences, and you can really take a lot out of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. With that, we are going to move on and address some of the listener questions. Nolan, would you like to start?
Sure. So, okay, you can hear me good. I was on mute for a second. We're going to start. We'll go through these different lists. Just to do quickly, just thank you to our panelists for your descriptive and personal answers. I'd imagine those listening have gotten a better feel for what it's really like to volunteer with one of our organizations, and nostalgia is mostly a good thing. Sometimes it's bad, but mostly a good thing, and thank you for being nostalgic and sharing your experiences with us. So now, since we had over 250 registered participants and currently have about 30 people listening, we figured we'd address a couple of the reoccurring questions that were asked. So here they are, as you can list them. Number one that we saw, and what we'll do is I'll answer, or we'll kind of answer in both ways from a WorldTeach and Peace Corps perspective. First is about family. This was something we saw with spouses and children. Again, our policy at WorldTeach, we don't have an official policy against bringing family with you during your volunteer year. However, we highly recommend you not to bring family, unless, of course, it's a husband or a wife or a partner who is actually going to partake in the volunteer experience, because we have no part in their insurance, their visa, daycare for potential children, or housing. This is all up to the volunteer to provide, which could get costly and could be an arduous process, especially setting up. Lori, do you have anything to add regarding policies for family with the Peace Corps?
Yes, we do allow couples to serve with their partner, but that would require both people in the couple to qualify, apply, and be actual Peace Corps volunteers. We do not allow children to come, any other family members to come and live with you while you are there, but visitors are always welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lori. The next question we saw consistently asked were the differences between the Peace Corps and WorldTeach. So again, for us, WorldTeach is a 501c3 nonprofit organization registered in Massachusetts. We're a non-government organization versus a government organization that is the Peace Corps. We directly partner with ministries and departments of education in developing countries, and teaching is the center of the volunteer experience. We do 4 weeks of training for our year programs and a week of training for our summer programs, versus 3 months for the Peace Corps. You have 11 months in destination in a community, and you don't have to be a U.S. citizen. So the biggest differences overall for us is teaching is the center point of your experience. You have a shorter time, which is 11 months versus the 2 years, and then also a non-government organization versus a government organization, and that's the biggest capacities. And of course, Lori, if you have anything to add, please, you can do so.
Sure. One other thing, so education is one of 6 of our programs, so depending on what program you enter in, that depends on kind of what the central point is for you. So we had 1 health educator speaking on the panel today and 1 education volunteer, so that was their main focal point, but we do have 5 others. And as you mentioned, for WorldTeach, you do not have to be a U.S. citizen, but since the Peace Corps is a federal agency, you are required to be a U.S. citizen to join.
Thank you, Lori. The next question that was asked for both of us is, what is required to be a teacher? A lot of questions came in. Do you need to be a certified teacher in a state or have a previous TEFL certification? And for our year-long programs at WorldTeach, a bachelor's degree is required, but we don't require teachers to be certified teachers. The one exception to that is our American Samoa program with our partners there that require all teachers have passed the praxis exam before teaching. We do offer TEFL certification as of June 2016 for all of our programs. There are, however, additional deliverables required during this time in your teaching assignment. Lori, if you'd like to elaborate anything on this.
Absolutely. We have opportunities available for anybody with a combination of relative job experience and education, but most of our opportunities do require a four-year degree. 95% of our volunteers do have a four-year degree. And all positions come with training in country. That's that 3-month training that Nolan was speaking to, and in that training you get language, culture, technical skills, and safety and security. We do focus on that sector. As I mentioned earlier, we have 6 sectors, so if you were an education volunteer, you would have 3 months of technical training. We do not offer the TEFL certificate.
Thank you, Lori. The next question we saw is age range. Typically for WorldTeach, our average volunteer is around in their mid-20s who has graduated a couple years before. However, the age range over history of WorldTeach volunteers is between 21 for year-long programs, 18 for summer programs, and 74 years old. Our China program, however, has a requirement for volunteers to be under 60. So overall, if you're between 21 and 74, you can definitely do this program, except for that one exception. And Lori, would you like to give your view, Peace Corps' view?
Yeah, so Peace Corps volunteers are as young as recent college graduates and as old as I served with a woman who is 80. So we do accept anybody because we want that experience that you have. About half of our volunteers are the recent graduate age. About 9% of our volunteers are 50 plus. So we have about 30% of our group right in that center range that are really the mid-career professionals.
Thank you, Lori. The next question that came up was actually regarding safety, both training as well as recommendations. And what I'm going to do here is for WorldTeach, I'm going to ask Liz and Heather to chime in from our standpoint on safety precautions given both during orientation and bits of advice for those considering our programs.
I guess I will start first. Heather here. And so for WorldTeach, during orientation, all of our orientations include at least 1 to 2 hours of safety and health training right at the beginning of orientation when the volunteers arrive, as well as a visit to the U.S. Embassy in the city that they are in, usually the capital of the country, and then just overall during orientation, the field director will continue to inform the volunteers about things to look out for and how to take care of themselves so that they are at least to put themselves at least risk while they're living in the country for the year. Liz, do you want to elaborate on what we talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Heather was saying, during orientation, we take some time to brief the volunteers on the safety issues that they might be presented with in their particular region, and we give them tools to address that, how to, as she said, lower the risk of being involved in some of the safety issues, whether it be theft and things like that, or if there are any natural disasters, how to best take care of yourself when those happen. In addition to the field staff being there, we also invite embassy members to come in. If it's in a country that has a U.S. embassy close by, we bring in locals at times. It depends on the resources in the country that we use on who we bring in. In addition, we have a really good field staff in country, so when there are safety risks, the field staff is in touch with all of the volunteers. We have an emergency action plan that is laid out. It's gone in depth during orientation, so everybody knows what steps to take in the event there are any safety issues for the entire group. And we also have a few other precautions, emergency phone trees, a few other things in place. So again, during orientation it gets covered, and then throughout your stay in country, we make sure that you're reminded of all of the protocols and updated on any information that needs to be updated.
One more thing, the field staff are in very close communication with the U.S. office, the staff here, and so if there is an emergency situation, like Liz mentioned, there is an emergency phone number that is available for both volunteers and for the field staff to call, and there's always a U.S. staff member on call 24 hours a day every month of the year.
Okay, thank you so much, Heather and Liz. And now, Lori, how about the Peace Corps? You and Abigail and Christina, would you like to elaborate a bit on the safety precautions of the Peace Corps?
Absolutely. I'll start with a little bit of our general Peace Corps safety, and then I'll ask Abigail and Christina to speak to how they felt in country with the safety security procedures. So Peace Corps safety and security begins, first of all, as we vet you to become a volunteer. It's a lengthy process because we are vetting for safety security reasons. We are also, when you meet up for your staging, which is pretty much what we call pre-departure orientation, it's one day that you're meeting somewhere in the U.S. with all the other volunteers going with you, and you're pretty much getting a full day of safety and security training that you all can discuss as you're hanging out in the airport, as you're flying out to site. When you land in country, you're picked up and taken straight 2 or 3 month orientation. And throughout that time, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of cultural training, which is our first step to help with safety and security. And that's when you're learning a lot about the emergency action plan. Every volunteer, every post has an emergency action plan. And this really helps us help you because you will know the communities much deeper than our program staff will. Our program staff has been there. They know people in the community. They know the people that you're working with. But you living and working there, you really know the ins and outs. We're trying to use the knowledge that you are gaining there and develop this emergency action plan just in case as a way to help us figure out exactly where the volunteers are in case we need to, including more often than not our volunteers now. It's 2015. Our volunteers typically have cell phones. And that is phase 1 in many of our emergency action plans is receiving a text alert of letting you know where to go, but also including consolidation points, including exiting the country. Christina, could you tell us a little bit about how you felt with safety security where you served?
Sure. I think, the first thing that Lori mentioned about integration, it was really key for me, integrating into my community. Obviously, I stuck out like a sore thumb, but once people know who you are and they know why you're there, it was really helpful because people that I didn't really even know who they were looking out for me, and so that was a really important piece. Things like going to church or going to different community events were always really important, and then yeah, overall, like I felt very safe my whole time. We had a great safety and security coordinator, and the whole Peace Corps staff was really responsive when anyone had any concerns. I didn't have any major concerns when I was in country, but from what I heard, they were very responsive.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. Abigail?
Yeah, so I would say for the most part, I felt very safe. Everybody in my village knew me. People passing by other villages would immediately know who I was. I think Peace Corps has a lot of great safety protocols in place. So I would say, use the Peace Corps safety protocols that are in place. They're there for you. At the same time, you can never truly delegate the responsibility of your safety to an organization or to anyone else. So don't rely on safety protocols to the extent that you stop listening to your gut or you stop looking around. And then with that said, things can happen because human beings are everywhere. So, you can be unsafe in the U.S. just as much as you could be in any other place all over the world. So you just have to kind of, remember that. And then, if something does happen to you, just, it's not your fault, and get ready to advocate for yourself, demand what you need, or find a friend who can help you get what you need. But ultimately, I think, at the end of the day, it's as safe an experience as any other. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. All right, and it looks like our last question is about funding. So I will start about Peace Corps. When you are applying, your pre-departure medical clearance costs are covered by the applicant. So this includes going to your primary for a full physical and to your dentist for a full dental examination. After that is done and you are medically cleared through Peace Corps Medical, all costs are covered by Peace Corps, including your airfare to and from country, full medical, full dental coverage in country, a living stipend, and in-country travel. At the end of service, you do get a readjustment allowance is what we call it. It's about $7,000 to get you back on your feet, making sure if there isn't a safety net of family and friends in the area that you are able to put a down payment on a home, feed yourself, get to a job interview, things like that for that first month that you're back.
Okay, thank you, Lori, for that elaboration on funding. So for WorldTeach, again, we have both year-long and summer programs. So 5 of our 11 year-long programs are fully funded, besides airfare. Airfare is not included. And the others require a marginal volunteer contribution between approximately $1,250 and $3,590 for the year. So the financial model basically has our partners, the ministries and departments of education, will secure funding for us that's earmarked based upon teacher shortages. And some of them give us full funding and others give us marginal funding. These contributions by the volunteer, this includes things such as your visa, your health insurance, that training, as well as your accommodations during that training and food, mid and end of year conferences, housing, either with a host family or with other volunteers in destination, as well as transportation in the country to your community. We also have a stipend for our year-long programs, which is basically parallel to what an average teacher in your region makes per month. We also, see here, have a funding page on our website with a link included on the screen, which can give you more ideas of how to potentially fund your program based on which one you would choose. So again, different models based upon a government versus non-government organization. Thank you again for all of your questions that have come in. We have had some that have come in during the webinar, which we can address through an email at info@worldteach.org. But as we go to the next slide here, just wanted to go and thank everyone again, the panelists and listeners, for being with us this evening. We'd like each of our panelists, all 4, to share their final thoughts with the listeners. Why should they do a program like this, and what it means to you both on a professional and personal level. We'll begin with Christina, and then we'll have Heather, then Abigail, and finally Liz. So Christina, would you like to share?
Yes. I think my kind of piece of advice or my closing thought would be that if you feel inclined to pursue one of these opportunities and you're able to, go for it. Because what I find is that, well, for me personally, it was something that it stuck with me for 2 years. Even after my initial reaction was that I would never want to do it, it still stayed with me. And I was lucky enough to have kind of the point in time in my life where it made sense to do it, and I was able to pursue it. And what I hear so often from other people that I meet is, oh, I always wanted to do that, but then life got too complicated because I bought a house or I got married or I had kids. And that's not to say that you can't do it after those things have occurred, but I think that if you kind of feel like you're at a point in your life where it makes sense to do it and you're able to, then you should do it. And then in terms of how it's affected me after, of course I have a much broader worldview, but in my current position, I'm the executive director of a really small nonprofit organization, and I stop and think every once in a while, wow, the uncertainty in this position reminds me so much of the uncertainty in Peace Corps, and I feel so much more confident to go with my gut instincts or make decisions based on the fact that I've been in that situation before, and have been successful. So I would strongly encourage anyone considering either program to pursue them.
I guess it's my turn now. I would like to echo everything that Christina just said, as well as I was one of those people who graduated from college and didn't really know what to pursue next. And this started my senior year of college, and where I had to try to think of the next step, and didn't really know what track to take, where it would lead me later on. So I just started to look at opportunities abroad because I did know that I wanted to travel more, and then that just led me along the path, and I didn't know what I was going to do after each stage in my life up until now, but each one led me to the next one, and I'm really glad that it did because it really helped me figure out where my motivations and passions lied, and that helped me find the opportunity with WorldTeach, which then kind of opened up tangible opportunities for me. And so it just really helped me put myself on a track that I didn't even know was there yet, and I'm really glad that it did. And obviously it really changed who I am as a person, fundamentally, just because I was exposed to so many different cultures, people, and experiences, and challenges, and also put myself in places where I was not comfortable, but was able to figure out how to navigate them, and came out stronger and more experienced that way. So I feel like I'm not the only person that happens to, and so I strongly encourage you to do it if you ever had that inkling to do it.
Awesome.
Yeah, for me, the Peace Corps was absolutely a transformative experience in my life. But it wasn't transformative for everyone, and I think it was transformative for me because I allowed it to be transformative. And I think you have to go into any experience, including WorldTeach, with that openness. I mean, if you let it, an experience like this can help you discover, who you really are without all of your normal activities and the things you're used to and all the comforts. It helps you see what it really takes to connect with somebody, and maybe even how little it takes to connect with somebody, just human to human, how much you can communicate without language. And I think it can really, for me, it's just brought such a depth to my life and a depth to my ability to understand other people and to understand myself. And yeah, so overall, whoever you are, I think you should do it.
All right.
This is Liz. So for my closing statement, I really liked what Abigail just said about openness, and then this is going to kind of backtrack to things that we were talking about before, but in terms of openness and expectations again, I think, if you're willing to really be ready to experience something and let some of your expectations go, because if you come in with expectations, even if the experience could be amazing, if your expectations aren't met, you might have kind of a negative attitude towards it because your expectations weren't met, even though the situation itself could be amazing. So if you're really ready to, go explore the world, serve communities, become part of communities, and if you're ready to, you're going to have challenges, you're going to have uncomfortable situations, but they're all going to produce really great things if you allow it to. I look back on my times both in American Samoa as a field director and in Chuuk Micronesia as a volunteer. And there were times that were really tough, but I have to tell you, even looking back at those rough times, I have nothing but fond memories. So of course, going through it right then, it was like, oh, everything feels like it's closing in. I have, I love my friends, my family, all these things, but you get through it and you have all these amazing experiences, and even the transformation that you can allow yourself to have, it's just amazing. Also, if you're going to apply for grad school afterwards or even job interviews, you'll get some great anecdotes that will really work in your favor.
Great. Thank you to the four of you. It's true. It makes me think Emily Dickinson wrote a poem that was all about this challenge that she had in her life and how hard it was when she was going through it. But then when it's gone, it's something that you miss and always kind of search for. So again, I thank all of you for joining, Lori, Abigail, Christina, Heather, and Liz. What you'll see here on the front for everybody who is still listening in, you can see some more information of how to contact us, both the Peace Corps and WorldTeach. You'll see that there are, again, a lot of similarities between both of these organizations and then some specific differences. If you have further questions about either organization, please send an email to those emails listed there. You will also receive a recorded copy of this webinar on your email. I think from all of us here, and Lori can echo this, happy holidays and happy new year from each of us, WorldTeach and Peace Corps. And as a final statement, we hope to see all of you soon with one of our organizations somewhere around the world. So thank you all very much. And Lori, if you'd like to add anything additional to end our webinar.
Just the same, please reach out if you have any questions. We're two great organizations. We hope you saw the benefits of both. So feel free to reach out to us because we'd love to see you spending the holidays abroad somewhere.
Okay, and good night to everyone. Thank you so much.